Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Leah. I am the Director of Knowledge Exchange at Women's Shelters Canada. I'm very excited to be welcoming you to this webinar today on part one of our Introduction to Development webinar series. So part one today focused on feasibility. I want to start before going too much further. I want to start by acknowledging that I'm joining you today from the traditional unceded territories of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Um, and this is where Women's Shelters Canada's office is based. And I also want to acknowledge my responsibility as a settler to continue to learn about historical and present impacts of settler colonialism and to do the work of reconciliation and decolonization. And I know there are folks joining us from lots of different places today. So if you want to take a few seconds in the chat to say hello, let us know where you're joining from. We would love to know who's with us. As you're doing that, before we get into the discussion, I'm going to do a few little housekeeping reminders here. So first off the bat, I have already mentioned we do have interpretation set up. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, you will see a little globe marked interpretation. You can choose English or French, depending on what you want to hear. So if you want to listen in English, choose English. If you want to listen in French, choose French. And I will put those instructions into the chat once I'm done speaking here as well. And if you have any questions about that, if you have any tech issues throughout today's session, please let me know in the chat and I will do my best to help you out. Awesome. And I love seeing all these hellos come in. It's so great to have folks from all across the country here. Um, Great. And it's great you're all using the chat because the next thing I was going to say is that you have probably noticed that you are muted, your video is off. We are using the webinar format today. We have more than 50 people here with us and it's still going up. So in order to have the best experience for everyone, the presenters are going to have video and mic. And for everyone else, we would love to have your participation through the question, the Q&A box, and through the chat. So if you have comments, if you want to say hi, if you have tech issues, pop those into the chat at any time. We'd love to hear them. If you have a question that you want the presenters to answer once they get into their presentations, please put that into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So that just helps make sure that we're keeping track of all of these questions. They're easy for me to manage and see so we can get to all of them. If you put them in the chat, they can sometimes get lost as people say other things. So questions in the Q&A box, everything else in the chat, and we're happy to hear from you those ways. You probably all got the notification when you came in, but we are recording today's webinar. We are going to share the recording afterwards, so anyone who signed up will get an email with the recording. We will also be posting the recording of this session and the other two sessions that are coming on our webinar library on our website, and I'll share that link with you all as well in a few minutes. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. So without too much further ado, let me say a little bit about what we're here for today. As I mentioned, this is the first in a three-part series aimed at giving you an overview of the development process, specifically for, shelters, transition houses in the domestic violence sector. So our presenters, we're going to hear for all three of the webinars in this series. We're going to hear from Kyla Tanner, Megan Golfetto, and Amanda Owens. So Kyla and Megan are the wonderful second stage transitional housing new build team here at Women's Shelters Canada, and they'll tell you a little bit more about their work. And Amanda Owens is the executive director of the Ksan Society in BC, and she's going to speak a bit more later on about her experience going through the development process. So we're very excited to have all three of these folks here with us today. Just before I hand it over to Megan and Kyla to start, I'm going to launch a poll. So let me get that open and then there we go. So that should pop up on your screens. And this is just a chance for us to get to know a little bit more about who's in the room. So let us know where you're joining from today. And do you currently have a project underway? So the options there are no, we're thinking about it, we're in the early stages, we're currently working on the design, we're in construction, or we just completed a project. So let us know where you're at. It just gives us a sense of who's here. kinds of questions you might have, that kind of thing. So I see a lot of folks doing this. I'm going to give it another 5-10 seconds here for everyone to fill this in. Great. Okay, that looks like most folks. So I'm going to end the poll and share those results. So you should see those on your screen now. So it looks like we have really good regional representation here. That's great. So we've got quite a contingent from Ontario, lots of folks from BC and the prairies, a few from Quebec, a few from the Atlantic provinces. So welcome everyone. That's really exciting. And lots of folks thinking about it in terms of current projects. So that's great. That's probably a really good place to be heading into part one of the series. So that's awesome. And then we do, of course, there's about 20% for in the early stages, 20% for currently working on design. So a lot of folks here in those kind of earlier phases, which is wonderful. I'm going to take that down. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Megan and Kyla.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Introduction to the Development Process webinar series. As Leah said, my name's Kyla Tanner. I'm the Development Project Manager at Women's Shelters Canada and joined by Megan Galfetto, the Project Coordinator at Women's Shelters Canada, and Amanda Owens, the Executive Director at Ksan Society in British Columbia. So we're all really excited to share some valuable insights with you today. But to start, both Megan and I are going to give a bit more of an introduction about ourselves. Amanda will also later in the presentation, just to kind of let you know who we are. So I've been working in the affordable housing development world for nonprofits and charities since 2019. And over the last 4 years, I've assisted quite a few organizations going through the entire development process, acting as a project manager for them. This involves everything from creating a feasible project, applying for funding, navigating design and development, and going through the construction phase too, which is all stuff that we're going to talk about throughout the three-part series. My passion for the right to safe and adequate housing for women and children led me to join the VAW shelter community in 2022 here at Women's Shelters Canada. I'll let Megan go next.
Thanks, Kyla. Hi, everybody. So I've been working in the VAW shelter sector since 2019 with experience both as a frontline worker and as a fundraising and communications professional. So, with a strong understanding of the needs of women and children fleeing violence, VAW shelter operations, and the challenges that come from a lack of safe, affordable, and adequate housing, I'm especially passionate about the creation of more affordable spaces for survivors. And I'm very excited today to share what we know about the development process.
Great. So let's get into the heart of why we're here today and why we want to talk about the development process. So we quickly realized that many executive directors find the development world unfamiliar and intimidating. Like you don't know what you don't know, and embarking on a new project can be really overwhelming. And judging from that poll, maybe that's where a lot of you sit today, where you're just thinking about the process and it feels daunting. Trying to juggle that alongside your regular responsibilities is really stressful because essentially you're doing another job off the side of your desk that you don't actually have any previous experience in. So in response, we created this three-part webinar series to help demystify the development process. We want to offer you a clearer understanding of what it takes to build a new facility, and we want to make the process less daunting, or at the very least, help you identify which aspects might be challenging and how you can seek some support. Over the 3 sessions, we're going to go over the basics of the development process. We'll identify key steps to building a new building and address questions like who to hire for your team, when to bring them on board, and what are the roles and responsibilities that everybody has. We know that the development landscape can be confusing, time-consuming, and probably an area where you don't have a lot of exposure. So we hope that by the end of the series, you're going to feel more confident about your role and what the next steps are for your project. So today's the first of the three-part. We're going to discuss the feasibility phase of the development process. And then in 2 weeks, on May 30th, we'll do design and development. And then the third and final one is on June 13th, and it's going to focus on the last 2 phases of the development process, both construction and operations. So hopefully you're signed up for the other ones. And if you happen to have to miss any because the time doesn't work for you, they will also all be recorded. So you can always watch it again afterwards. Or if you want to rewatch it, that'll be an option too. Just noting that this series is a high-level overview. So each of these phases could probably have multiple dedicated sessions to them with resources like training courses, modules, toolkits, all of that stuff. But we just wanted to provide you with an overview to really begin the learning journey and start things off. For what we're going to discuss today, Megan's going to start us off and introduce Women's Shelters Canada, as well as our second stage transitional housing new build project, and then give a really brief overview of the entire development process. So all 4 of those phases. Then we'll stop. We can take some questions then. And then I'll dive into the feasibility part itself, and that'll probably be the bulk of our slide deck. We'll stop again for questions after that because it'll be a lot of information. And then we'll turn things over to Amanda, and she's going to share her experience with the feasibility phase and answer questions really from that VAW shelter perspective, which I think is going to be super valuable for everybody here. And then we'll wrap up with the details for the next 2 sessions and go over a few of the resources that we've been creating that are on our webpage. Okay, so I'll turn things over to Megan to get us started.
Hey, great. Thank you, Kyla. Okay, so we're going to just start by introducing our organization and our project. So, Women's Shelters Canada, or WSC, is a national association and a network of 16 provincial and territorial associations. Together, we represent over 600 shelters across Canada. And our mission is to provide a unified voice for systemic change to end violence against women. We also take a leadership role in fostering collaboration and facilitating knowledge exchange among shelters and transition houses nationwide. Okay, and jumping into the second stage transitional housing new build project. So in 2020, the research team at Women's Shelters Canada published a report on second stage shelters in Canada. This report examined the spectrum of supports for survivors of violence and discussed how second stage shelters address and close housing gaps and break the cycle of abuse. One of the key takeaways of the report is while second stage housing is deeply important for a survivor's healing journey, there's not enough of this type of housing across Canada. And this is how our project was born. So, as many of you know, demand for more safe and affordable spaces for women and children fleeing violence far exceeds the supply. Turnaway rates at women's shelters are increasing, and waitlists for social and subsidized housing can be years long. At the same time, as Kyla alluded to earlier, we realized that many executive directors are unfamiliar with the development world, and taking on a development project is a very stressful experience and often involves learning a completely new language that shelter directors just don't have experience with or exposure to. So, with these things in mind, Women's Shelters Canada wanted to build some capacity in our sector. And with a generous donation from the Slate Family Foundation, the second stage transitional housing new build project was launched in September of 2022 with the express purpose to offer support to shelters embarking on second stage housing projects. It's $2 million and it's spread out over 4 years. So, when we started this project, we wanted to know several things. One, what shelters were already building new second stage transitional housing? Two, who received funding but lacked the capacity to see it through? Three, who applied for funding but was unsuccessful? And four, who has a project idea but isn't even at the stage of applying for funding yet? So, to discover this, we sent out a survey in October 2022 and we received more than 100 responses. And for those of you here today that did answer the survey, we want to thank you very much for your participation. That's very important and valuable information. Also, as a part of the survey, you could fill out an expression of interest if you were looking for support from Women's Shelters Canada on your project. And we received 28 of these. So, the survey and the expressions of interest told us which organizations in Canada were thinking about building second stage transitional housing. We surmise that there's a great desire in our sector to extend the housing continuum for survivors, which is excellent. So, we connected with the organizations that completed an expression of interest to see where they were at with their project. We offered to meet with many of the shelters just to share some information about the SSTH new build project and also see where these shelters could use support and guidance. And these meetings became our first service that we offer on an ongoing basis now, which are our knowledge and coaching sessions. Oh, so in these sessions, we meet with shelters one-on-one to discuss their development project. Whether they're in the early stages of their project, exploring feasibility, or in the midst of construction, our team is available to discuss the shelter's project status and next steps. We can facilitate community connections or make referrals to relevant supports and resources to help progress the project, and we're always available for follow up calls. We also offer project management services to select shelters. These services can include the assessment of project feasibility, conducting ongoing financial analysis with capital and operational budgets, assistance with grant applications, coordination of the design team to progress the project, and support with the ongoing demands of the construction process. So, since our launch, we've engaged more than 30 shelters nationwide through our knowledge and coaching sessions, providing tailored advice and resources. We're also actively providing project management services to 3 shelters, one in the construction phase, another that began construction this past April, and the third exploring the feasibility of their project idea. Additionally, we assisted 6 shelters apply to the Rapid Housing Initiative third round, CMHC's Rapid Housing Initiative. Recently, we supported 3 shelters submit seed funding applications to CMHC. And now we're beginning to assist another 6 shelters to do a feasibility assessment for their second stage project idea. And to further support the sector, we develop and offer free resources, such as this webinar, to help demystify the world of building and development. Some of the resources that we've already created include a document that outlines common terms and acronyms that are used often in the development sector. There's a funding and financing matrix that reviews some of the national funding programs available for new builds. And we also have a template for organizations to use to request development charge waivers from their local government. So please check out our webpage to access these materials and always feel free to contact us with any ideas that you have for new resources that we can create to assist you in your project. And something that I'd like to mention, but it's not indicated on the slides, is our project evaluation. So we contracted the University of Ottawa just to complete an evaluation of our project to check in on how we're doing and if there's anything that we could do to improve our support to shelter organizations. And based on the results that we received this past January, our project is functioning as intended, which is great news. And project participants are very happy with the support that we've provided so far. So we'll be doing another evaluation closer to the end of the project just to reassess. And this map is a visual of what I just talked about on the previous slide. So it outlines the locations where we've worked with or are currently working with shelters that are exploring developing new second stage housing. So the green dots are shelters that we've had those one-on-one knowledge and coaching sessions with or provided resources to. The 3 in purple are the shelters receiving project management services. The 6 blue dots are the shelters that we helped with their Rapid Housing Initiative applications. And this group is actually also continuing to meet as a small community of practice because they just found the meeting so helpful. The 6 in yellow are now receiving support with their feasibility assessments, and the 3 dots in orange indicate the shelters that we helped submit seed funding applications for. Okay, so with our introductions complete, we're now going to get into the bulk of the presentation today, the development process. We break down the development process here into 4 key phases. The first phase is feasibility, which is the focus of our webinar today. Here, you're going to set the vision for your project and assess its viability. It's the critical juncture where you decide whether to continue investing time and resources into pursuing your dream project. The second phase is design and development. During this phase, you're going to create a feasible design, source some funding to move forward, and obtain necessary approvals, often from your municipality or region, to proceed with building new structures. I just want to make a note that while Kyla and I may use the term new build throughout the duration of the webinar series, the majority of what we'll cover applies equally to retrofit projects. Moving on to the third phase, we have construction. This is the phase where your vision starts taking physical shape as you actually build the structure and prepare to rent out the units. And finally, there's operations. And this is the phase where you're going to move in your residence, start maintaining the building, and experience the exciting moment of the grand opening. It's the realization of your idea and the completion of all of the preceding steps. And operations will continue as long as you're providing services. However, no matter how well you prepare, even if your project seems simple and straightforward, challenges are inevitable. Kyla came across a really great visual representation in a presentation by SHS Consulting in Toronto that perfectly captures the reality of this. What happens in practice is often very different than what we plan in theory. So, the squiggly line is a great metaphor for your project's journey. You'll likely find yourself dealing with unforeseen issues like soil contamination or being unable to acquire your initial building choice. You might realize your project costs are higher than expected, leading to necessary adjustments in your original vision, or you might need to hire new builders or architects along the way. Your project path will likely not be a straight line, and that's perfectly normal. But the key is to be prepared, adaptive, and resilient to change. Remember that facing challenges doesn't mean that you're moving backward, it's just a part of the journey forward. And with that, I just want to open up the floor if there are any questions. Pass it to Leah to field those.
Yeah, so we do have a question to start us off here, and it's about the services that you and Kyla offer. So, can we get support at any time and or at any phase?
Yes, so we do encourage you to reach out to either myself or Kyla. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation. That's also on our website. And we will set up one of our knowledge and coaching sessions with you to just kind of talk about where your project is and what kind of support you're looking for and guide you in the right direction. If there's anything you want to add to that, Kyla, feel free.
Oh, that's perfect.
That's great. Thanks. And just on that note, too, I will just say that I have put the website link in the chat for everyone in English and French, as well as today's presentation slides in English and French. So you can take a look at those for contact information. We do have a couple other questions that have come in. So one is, what do you mean by retrofit projects?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. So when we say new construction, you're often thinking probably of like empty land, or maybe there's a building that actually has to be demolished and then you're building brand new. Okay. If it's a retrofit, this might be an existing building that's being converted. Sometimes you see this with churches or office space right now. I worked on a project that at one point it was a school built in the 1930s. It was then converted into offices around the 90s, and then we were converting it into housing today. So that would be more of that retrofit, conversion, adaptation. These are all kind of synonymous terms, and that might be what you're thinking of for your project. So don't discount the stuff we're saying. It's all going to be applicable. Maybe just like a few things would be only for new construction, but for the most part, it'll apply to both.
Great. And are there seed funding applications open at this time?
Okay. With the word seed, I think that you're probably talking about the CMHC. So that's the Canadian Mortgage Housing Corporation. They have a funding application that they call seed funding. They had just opened it on, I believe it was even March 1st. It was very at the very beginning of March this last year. It had been closed for about a year and a half prior to that. What we were told is that it was going to be like, it was kind of an open application window. You'd get your applications in. They're going to run out of money at some point. We were told by CMHC to get the applications in about 2 weeks because that money is very much in demand. I did hear of somebody who submitted maybe 1 or 2 weeks ago, and it looks like the application went through. They haven't heard back whether they were successful or not. But the three that Megan and I applied to in March have already received, like they were successful, which is great. So I don't think it's still open. It might be worth applying. Again, feel free to reach out to us and we can maybe inquire with somebody in your local jurisdiction, because CMHC likes to do things regionally.
Awesome. And we'll take one more question now, and then we'll continue with your presentation, and there'll be another Q&A period in a little bit. So the last question here at the moment, someone who's been to the website and says, I see your project management applications are closed. Is this due to capacity or funding? If a shelter had the means to pay for these services, are they available with you?
I love it. Sadly, it's more capacity. It is just Megan and I right now. And in my experience doing this previously, you're kind of having about 3 to 4 projects that you're doing project management at once kind of fills your bucket, I would say, in terms of work for like a team of two. On top of that, Megan and I are trying to do resources such as this. So at this point, we can't take on more to do project management. That said, and this will be talked about in the presentation, but just to say that there's probably somebody you can hire in your local area. And if you don't know of anyone, again, Megan and I should be able to find somebody who could be accessible to you, especially in, now that we've done the virtual world. They might not be really local, but they might still be able to offer those services in your area. And we can help you kind of scope some of that work, hopefully keep the costs down, maybe figure out some of those early funding applications. So yeah, this is all going to be discussed. So great question.
Great. So why don't we keep going with the presentation and we'll come back to questions in a little bit.
Perfect. And if anybody wanted to follow up on the questions that we asked too, feel free to do that in the Q&A and we can always and dive in more kind of once we've finished. Okay, so diving into feasibility. So this is the first step of the 4 phases. And here's kind of an overview of what a feasibility phase might look like. So the purpose is that you want to set your vision for the project and figure out if it's actually financially viable. How are you going to do that? Here's a long list of activities. We're going to have slides on each of them, but you're likely here, and in that poll, it kind of talked about like that you have an idea. You're thinking about the project, or maybe you're already taking a few of these first steps, but even if you've just got the idea, you've begun. So you've already gotten started on. Next, you want to set up a team that's going to help you accomplish this. So somebody has already talked about project management, right? Setting up a team like that. You're going to create a needs assessment. You're going to refine your initial idea. You're going to create what we call an architectural program, and really like we'll dive into that because that's probably like a new word that you haven't heard before. Determine your organizational structure for the project. Select a site if you don't already have one. Do some early concept drawings. So that's engaging the architect for the first time, and conduct some preliminary financial analysis. So we've got the word pro forma up here. You're going to hear that a few times, but if it feels unfamiliar, it's financial analysis. So figuring out how much your building is actually going to cost. Maybe that's the only reason that you're here today. So you want to know how much this is going to cost, right? It's probably the thing that's most important for people. And then throughout the whole thing, you're going to be doing some early outreach to get some buy-in from your project, to get some support that's local. At the very end, all of these activities are going to create these outputs that you can package really nicely into what we call a business case. You might call it a feasibility study or a feasibility assessment, but it's going to clearly wrap up all of these initial findings that you've done. And it's amazing to use for funding applications. It's done all of your work for you, and now it's a nice package. And you can just go to that when you're going to apply for funding and pull pieces out from there. How long is it going to take? That really depends on the amount of time and resources that you can dedicate to undertaking all of these steps. So I'd say like a really short timeline is probably 4 to 6 months. You'd have to have a pretty supportive and engaged board that's going to help expedite this. And you're likely going to have to hire some team members to get through it, which we'll touch on shortly. Something that's probably more realistic is like 6 to 12 months. And in some cases, it's going to take more than a year. That's perfectly okay. Don't panic if that's already been happening for you. Maybe you've been working on it for multiple years. It happens. And your first go at it actually might not be what you end up building. So maybe originally you're like, I want 20 units and I want all of this office space and a daycare. And you find out how much money it's going to be. And you're like, well, we can afford, a quarter of that. Then you're probably going to go back to the drawing board. Maybe you only have 10 units. Maybe it's half the office space. Maybe there's no daycare. It depends, right? Things are going to change. Also, political priorities are going to change. Funding programs are going to change. I've already talked about one that was closed and then it opens. That happens at all 3 levels of government. Your staff could change, your board turnover. All of these things will end up adding to the time that you're spent in this part. The important thing to know is that you're not going to move on to phase 2, that design development, until you have something that's viable, until you've got that vision and something that's really clear that's going to pencil out and work. We kind of think of this like a recycling symbol, right? So you're going to like go around and around a few times through multiple iterations until you've refined and really developed something that is going to work. Okay, so you're probably here because you have an idea, right? You're at this webinar because there's something going on. Maybe you know that you want more units for the women that you're currently housing, or you have an emergency shelter and you want to create second stage for the first time. Or maybe your current building's actually falling apart and you just need to replace it. So congratulations. If you've got that idea, then your development process journey has actually already begun. But what's the next step? Next would be figuring out who your team is. The most important one is yourself as the project, like maybe you're the owner or the operator, but it's your organization that's going to be kind of the main lead, right? You're driving this. Within your team, you're going to want to have one kind of key contact or lead who's going to champion the project. This is probably your executive director, but not in all cases. Probably depends on the size of your organization, and maybe you have other staff and somebody else is going to lead it. But you also need to clarify the roles and involvement of the rest of the organization. So what is the board doing? Do you actually want to set up a special like subcommittee of your board, call them maybe a development committee just for this project? And as well as involving your staff. So you want to delineate their roles, and that's going to avoid confusion along the way. And it's really nice to set this up at the beginning because then, it's a lot clearer as you go through, as opposed to getting to like a crunch point and then being like, oh, I don't know who's actually supposed to sign off on this or look at it. And oh, we forgot to share it with the staff. And now we need to go back. So set that up at the beginning. It can always change, and that's fine. But think about it at the beginning by asking some of these questions like, who has decision-making authority for hiring team members, such as your architect? Is that the board? Is that a committee? Is that the executive director and they can just sign off on it? And there might be like a specific like amount of money that actually triggers board involvement. So maybe hiring somebody for a contract that's more than $50,000, for example. You're going to hire a lot of other people to do smaller contracts that are maybe $1,000 or $2,000. It's kind of annoying to always have to go back to your board for all of those, especially if you want to turn it around quickly and you're waiting for your bi-monthly board meeting. In those cases, you want the executive director to be able to just sign off on that. So figure that stuff out at the beginning and figure out what the roles are for your own team. And maybe you want to do a committee, but you don't have to, right? Like that's, if it doesn't make sense for you, that's perfectly fine. If you are interested in it, Megan and I have created a terms of reference, and it's just like a template. It's on our website. Feel free to download that and edit it as you see fit, just to kind of outline what their role is for the project. So you can go through the entire feasibility study on your own. I'd say that that would probably lead more to the time frame of taking kind of that year plus, as opposed to hiring somebody that could maybe get you down to 6 months. So we'd recommend considering hiring a project manager. This might also be called a development consultant or even a development manager. These are all synonymous terms. We're going to use project manager because that's what we're most familiar with. But if you're used to hearing development consultant, just kind of switch that out in your mind as we use PM. So the project manager, they can lead you through the steps that we're going to go over in this webinar, but they can help you create a vision for your project. They can actually do the needs assessment for you. They can help you hire the other team members like an architect. They're going to do that financial analysis for you, so that pro forma modeling. They'll also help you explore sites if you don't have one. And they should be able to not only know about the funding, but actually do the applications for you. So as we talked about, like Megan and I did those CMHC seed funding applications, that would be the role of a project manager, that they would undertake a lot of that. You are always the decision maker as the owner, right? You would be their client and they are your consultant. So you make the decisions, but they can go and do the work, which is really nice. And some of them are nonprofit organizations. So they should be able to offer you good rates if they're a nonprofit. And they should also be able to understand the context of your organization better. So everybody here who's doing VAW shelter and transitional housing, your rent rates are going to be really low. So a for-profit PM might not understand that so well, but the nonprofit ones should be very familiar with this. And if you're having trouble finding somebody in your area, Megan and I have a list. So we should be able to help you make a connection with somebody, depending on where you're located. And for them to help you with the feasibility study, you're probably thinking oh, how much will it cost me? I think if they're quoting you more than say $50,000, that seems like too much. Their scope is either too large or maybe they're just too expensive. But I think you could adjust their scope of work and have it much lower. We have seen somebody that was quoted closer to $10,000. And honestly, that seemed like a really good deal, especially for the amount of work. So maybe in your mind, you're kind of thinking somewhere between those two amounts. And again, they're going to apply for funding. So ideally, they're helping to pay for themselves at some point. And when we launched this project, we did hear repeatedly from shelter EDs that having a project manager was a key to their success. Or some of them even noting that they wish they had hired them sooner, that they kind of struggled through the first few years, but then once they had the project manager, things kind of got going a lot faster. So while, yes, you do have to pay for them, ideally they're saving you money in the long run, because then you're not spinning your wheels for all of those years. So we just have a few quotes there from shelters that were just kind of emphasizing this. So it's not just coming from Megan and I, we are hearing this from the sector. The other two that you might want to hire during this phase would be the architect and possibly a planner. So for an architect, they would help you do preliminary concept drawings. They can also assist with what we call cost estimations. So figuring out how much the entire building might cost to build. Your PM and the architect might do that together. And you can keep their scope of work fairly small in feasibility so that they don't cost you too much. But their expertise could be really valuable, especially like feeding into kind of that vision, and they might be thinking of things that you guys just haven't, for example, and bring it up and ask those like probing questions. And then you do want to include the daycare, for example. If you're in a more urban area, we do recommend considering hiring a planner if you're still looking for a site, or if your current site isn't appropriately zoned to have a shelter or second stage housing on the property. Zoning bylaws are really complex, and unless you're doing that as your full-time job, it's quite difficult to put in those applications. If you're in a rural area, though, probably not necessary. We find that working with the local government, they're really good. They can walk you through, and there aren't so many bylaws that you're having to navigate, and the approval process moves really quickly too. Where in an urban area, I've seen them where it's been like upwards of a year just to get the site like appropriately zoned, which can be really painful. Which is why you want a planner to help you with all that. How much, again, you're probably thinking like, how much will this cost me? For an architect to do just the concept drawings, they are going to need to have a few meetings with you. They need to understand what your vision is. They're going to ask some questions. They're probably going to do a few iterations of the drawings too. We would expect you to have to pay at least a few $1,000s. If you're in a smaller location, maybe a local architect, they might even consider donating some of their time. If you're in an urban area with a larger project, then you might be closing in closer to the $10,000 mark. Yeah, okay, so we mentioned a needs assessment. So this could be really useful to have. It's, I'd say, quite common for traditional affordable housing. You're probably thinking, well, I know my need, like I've got turnaway rates and all of this stuff. That's why I'm here, because I know I have a need for my project. What you want to do though is back that up with numbers and evidence. It's going to go a long way, especially with your funders. So some things that you're going to want to identify within that needs assessment is the residents. So it's probably women and children fleeing violence, but consider who is going to be living in the building. Considering wait lists. So if you have your own wait list for shelter spaces, or if there's wait lists for affordable housing in your area, that could be a really powerful indicator of need. If it's years long to get housing, and that's why women are staying longer in your shelter, for example, note that here. And unit types can also be really important. So are a lot of one bedrooms in demand, or do you see a need for larger family units? And what about other spaces? So like, is there, no daycare on the entire like west side of the community, and therefore there's a need for one and you want to put one into your building? Identify that here as well. And then you're going to want to refine your idea. So you've got your light bulb, but you want to be able to create a really clear vision that your design team's going to implement. So something that the project manager, the architect, everybody, they're going to run with later. And you want this clear at the beginning because you want to make sure that everybody's on the same page, even within your own team. So you don't want your board thinking that you're building one thing and the ED is telling, prospective funders and partners something completely different. It's going to also save you money with the consultants from spinning their wheels. So I've been on the consultant side. And for example, when you're dealing with a committee of literally 12 people and they all kind of want different things, it makes more sense for them to meet alone first, have their own vision, and then come forward with it. The consultant can help you get to that. They can ask the right questions, but you want to make sure that once you've like solidified what the vision is, that everybody's on the same page. So we've got an example on the slide here, and this would be what we would think of as a vision. So it's to develop, name your project, just put project 1, encompassing short-term and transitional housing for women and children fleeing violence with wraparound supports in a new building, replacing the existing building at Main Street. It's really clear. It's one sentence. It's a long sentence, but essentially it's like your elevator pitch, right? And that's what you're going to always use when you're repeating this to other people. Once you've got that vision laid out, then you want to go a bit more granular. So we call these strategic objectives. It's how you're going to accomplish your vision. So how are you going to accomplish that elevator pitch sentence? Again, we've got a few examples on here, but you're going to ask questions like, what are the priorities for the building? Is it affordability, safety and security, environmental efficiency, physical comfort? What are those? And so the examples you might list for strategic objectives are to develop a safe and secure building for residents and staff, to include flexibility in design to allow for adjustments to meet current needs. We're actually seeing this in quite a few shelters where there's the ability to adjust walls and doors so that you've got different unit mixes. Maybe that's a priority for you guys. And maybe the inclusion of outdoor green space, like that's a number one, like you have to have some sort of outdoor green space for both staff and tenants. And then from there, so let's go to like our third tier, right? So vision, strategic objectives, and now we also want concept principles. And this is guiding the physical design of your project. Few examples: creating accessible and barrier-free spaces. Maybe you even want a number here. You want like 20% of your units or 40% of your units to be accessible because you know that that's a huge need for the women here. Designing spaces for confidential use, making sure that office to office, that voices don't carry. Including a range of room types, including self-contained rooms. Like if that's something that you want, like where everybody has their own kitchen and bathroom, name it here, and then you're not getting confused later. And all three tiers are useful, especially when the architect comes into play. And this is really useful, I'd say, also for like when you get to phase two, when you're in more of that design phase. It's really nice to just pass along a document with your list of items highlighted instead of them going away, creating what they think is a really beautiful building and like is maybe what you need. And you're looking at it and you're like, well, the rooms are shared and there's no green space and it's missing all of my important things. Now you've just, paid them to design something that you're actually not interested in. So if you have that clear and upfront, then that's going to be like helpful, save you some money later. You're probably wondering, well, how do I even know what to include? How do I know which of these four things I should have? So Megan and I are working on a resource right now. It's not live on the website yet, but hopefully in the next kind of couple weeks to couple months at the latest. And within that, it's going to have a whole bunch of examples. It's going to demonstrate like maybe what that package would look like at the end. But I'd say even more importantly, we've outlined a ton of questions that you can ask to your board, your staff, and ideally also survivors, and asking those questions of them to understand actually what should be included in the building, right? So it's not so top down that it is bottom up. So we'll have this posted on our website at some point, and we will also send it out on our mailing list. So hopefully people are signed up, but one of the final slides will have a link there in case you aren't. Another really helpful resource when you're considering these three tiers is it's called the Women's Centered Housing Design Toolkit, and it was created by the BC Society of Transition Houses last year. There are three tiers. They call them principles, strategies, and actions, but essentially it's the same idea. Super comprehensive, all online, and I'd say even if you're like in a more advanced phase and you're not just in the early design, it's still worth taking a look at, because sometimes there are things like, I don't know, even like paint color is in there. That's something you're deciding closer to the end. And there's a checklist that you can download, literally like you print it off, hand it out to your staff maybe, and have everybody check stuff off. So highly recommend you check that one out as well. So once you have all of this created, then you want to do what we call an architectural program. That's probably a new word for you, but essentially it could look like what we've got over on our right here. And this is an example of one for a 12-unit building, but it's a list of all of your building's wants and needs. So you can see there of the 12 units, it's a mix of 1, 2, 3, and 4. But what is all of the community space that's needed? What are those exact office spaces? What is shared space? And what is private in the bedrooms? So you're listing out all of those things. And then from there, your project manager and or your architect can help you figure out actually what the sizing is. So they'll have an idea of what is kind of an average size for those units. It's probably a range. So you can also kind of think about what you would want for your building. And I'd also recommend at the beginning, like do your dream building, like think big, shoot for the stars. because it's likely going to have to get scaled back, but don't scale it back even before you get started, right? Like put in all of your wants because you never know. Maybe you're actually going to get them all. And then, that's always a nice surprise. So in this example, we've got a project that's about 13,000 square feet. And that's important to know for when you're picking out your site and also figuring out what the cost is, right? Like if it's half the size, it's going to be a completely different cost. So this is the first time that you're figuring out what the physical size of that building would be. Another step that you're going to want to do is figuring out your organizational structure. So I think I've been referring to you guys mostly as like the owners, but maybe you're not. Maybe you don't actually own the building and you just operate it. That's quite common in BC, where their funding program for second stage is actually that the province owns the site and the building and that the shelter is the operator of it. So figuring that out early is good. There's pros and cons to both. So thinking through what you would actually want. Exploring partnerships is important too. I've been using daycare a lot as an example. So if you want that in, maybe you're kind of talking to another daycare that wants to expand and possibly be in your building. You also want to think about the property management structure and, kind of that landlord role. So are you taking care of the property aspects of the building and, like renting, that sort of thing, as well as case management for the residents? Or would you rather separate these out and hire a company that does kind of more of that property management side? And then also support services. So is your organization the one that's directly providing those support services, or do you need some partnerships to come in and offer that to the women who are staying there? I'd say one of the biggest things that's going to come into play, sorry, in the feasibility is your site. So if you don't already have a site, maybe you're really lucky and there's like enough room on your current building's property and you can build right next to it. If not, this is probably front of mind. It's probably a bit stressful trying to figure it out. Your project manager is going to be able to help you with this. I've also worked on a project where we involved a real estate agent and they started sending us listings, and we quickly realized that the housing provider that was doing the project, they were really interested in the ones that were close to their existing buildings. And once the real estate agent knew that, he was actually able to find a building that was not listed for sale, talk to them. They wanted to sell and purchase the property. That was actually the conversion of the school and then the office space. And they just opened their doors last month. So that all worked out really well. Without that real estate agent, never would have known that that was an opportunity. And it was less than 100 meters from their existing building. So worked out really well. Knowing that it was really important for them to be close to their services is important. And we would highly recommend you develop what we call site criteria. So again, kind of similar to like earlier, like what are your wants and needs? Do you want to be close to public transportation and health resources? Do you want a walkable neighborhood? I think having a welcoming neighborhood is a big bonus, and not facing what we call NIMBYism. So not in my backyard, but actually facing kind of backlash from the community of them not wanting you there. Appropriate zoning, I mentioned earlier, it could take up to a year to change your zoning in an urban area. So thinking about that. And an appropriately priced site. If it's going to take up half your budget just to buy the land, it's probably not the one for you, right? If you're able to get it for free, that is the ideal. And an appropriate parcel size too. So 13,000 square feet for 12 units, that's maybe not so hard to find a site. But if you're thinking that you want to do like 30 units, you're not going to be able to find a little teeny tiny site that you then have to go like 10 stories high. That just doesn't make sense. You're going to need a bigger parcel size for that. And yeah, for the price of the site, ideally you're getting it for free. That's kind of a make or break for some projects. So always go and talk to your local government first, your municipality. They should have a list of land that is available that they're willing to donate. Any philanthropists or local companies in your area, maybe the partner organization, maybe that daycare that wants to come in is actually sitting on a really big piece of land. Perfect. Kind of come up with some sort of agreement with them. Always explore all those options first before you're going to start thinking about spending money on it. Once you've chosen your site, now would be the time to engage the architect and start doing that conceptual design drawing. It doesn't really make sense to do it before because it's probably like whatever your design ends up being, it's going to be really site specific. So wait until you have like at least some sort of an agreement for your site, because you also don't want to spend money on a site where you haven't even talked to the buyer or anything like that, because maybe you don't end up getting it and then you've paid for drawings that you'll never use. But a conceptual design is the very first image of what your project might look like. So we've got an example over here on the right. It's pretty basic. It's really just like the outline of your building and how it's going to fit. But it can be useful when you're first trying to get some sources of funding and discussing with partners. People really like visuals and tangible things. And it's going to give you an idea of the size of your building. You can kind of figure out what the ground floor size might be and how many stories it would be from there. And now something that I mentioned, I think is probably front of mind for people is how much is it going to cost, right? Like we know that we're going to be talking in really big numbers here. So how are you going to figure that out? This is when the performa comes into play. So a performa is a really complex financial modeling system. It's usually in Excel and it's got linked formulas. Once you know that architectural program, that's when you're going to be able to start using the performa and putting it in, because now you have a size and you've got an idea. And it's going to let you know if you think the project is going to cost $5 million or $20 million, right? Like that's going to be the first time that you're sort of getting a really rough estimate, but it's going to be used all the way through construction. And it's just going to keep getting refined over and over. But the goal of it is just to offer an estimate of your building cost and help you understand if you've got a feasible project, or if you need to go back to the drawing board. So in that recycling symbol kind of thing, if it's $20 million and you are expecting only 5, then that would be the time that you go back and you might need to rethink a few things. So, I told you to dream big, but maybe there's no rooftop pool and that's why it's costing so much. But no, realistically, like maybe that's changing your unit sizes from the 500 square foot to 400 square feet. And maybe you wanted every unit to have a balcony. Maybe that doesn't make sense, but you can still do one balcony per floor, for example, and then it becomes more of a communal space. There's things that you can think about that's going to help you rework that and bring down the costs. In terms of what you should expect for a cost, like when I say it's too expensive, you might be like, well, even $5 million sounds too expensive. You kind of think of these usually for like cost per unit, but also cost per square foot. That's also what the funders really care about. Ideally, your project is going to cost less than $500,000 per unit. Megan and I have lots of examples of projects that have moved ahead that cost more than that. But even at $500,000, your funder is going to tell you it's too expensive. And if you're applying for competitive funding, it will hurt you. So the cheaper you are able to get that down, the better. But don't compromise on all of your designs. You don't want the building at the end of the day that you don't even want to operate because you cut everything out of it. Cost per square foot, that's also going to vary a lot depending on context. Your price of land will play into this too. If you're in a more rural area, I'd say you can get probably as low as maybe $300 per square foot, where if you're in an urban area, maybe closer to 450 or 500. It really depends if you're doing also wood framed or concrete. For a concrete building, that's going to easily add another $100 per square foot. Concrete's super expensive. If you can avoid it, I highly recommend building in wood. And okay, so for the performa, this is like a part of one as an example on the right, but within your performa, you've got 2 different budgets. One is a capital budget and the other one is operational. So capital, that covers everything related to like land, building materials, equipment, consultants, and that's divided then further into 2 categories: hard costs and soft costs. Hard costs are your building materials and your labor. So that's the stuff that's like really tangible. It's the costs that you can touch and see. And your construction manager or your builder, they should be giving you that number at some point. At the beginning, when it's a cost estimation, your project manager or your architect can help you with it. The soft costs are all of the consultants. So like your architect, the project manager, any site studies that need to be done, geotechnical reports, environmental site assessments, all of that. We'll touch on those in our second webinar. But essentially, if it's not a building material or labor, then you can think of it as a soft cost. So that's language that you'll probably hear quite a bit from your team. That's the capital budget. The operational budget is actually once the building is up and running. So that's your staff salaries, your utilities, your maintenance, your repairs. You guys probably have an operational budget for whatever building you're currently operating, right? So think about it like that. And this really starts once your building is operational. So capital starts from your light bulb moment. Maybe you're already in it, maybe you've already paid something, then all the way until you cut the ribbon on the building and people are moving in. You've got the lights on, you're paying that utility bill. Now you're flipping over to the operational budget. And yeah, so if we're scaring you too much with the pro forma and it feels really complicated, again, this should be something your project manager does. It's their bread and butter. It's where they live. It's what Megan and I do a lot of the time. We're living in these Excel documents. You're inputting data from the various sources, but you will probably need to help the project manager a bit with the operational budget. They're going to be really good with the capital and they'll lead a lot of that. They can also let you know which expenses should be there for operational if you're feeling a bit lost. But if you can provide them specific numbers, that's useful. And if you don't know them, talking to a shelter in your area would be helpful. Maybe your provincial association, or again, reach out to Megan and I, and we might be able to give you a rough idea. And just noting for these performas, there's going to be literally hundreds of versions of them. That's not to be scary. It's just like every time you make a change, you want to save a new version and remember it because things are going to change. And you might end up having to go back to an old number at some point. Okay, getting near the end of this. We'll pause for questions soon, but just to say during all of these, like these ones have been pretty sequential up till now, but your early outreach can be happening the entire time. It's getting really early support, connecting with people locally, and getting them excited about your project, right? So local champions might be like your local counselor or government officials, elected representatives, people that are going to advocate for your project. Also, those organizations or partnerships that you might be having, talking to those daycares, right? Local donors or funders, that would be nice people to get on board right now. Even if they're able to give you small money now would be amazing. Bigger money later, great. And again, if you're in an urban area, there might even be a local community association that at some point you're going to have to actually engage. It could be a requirement. I know it is in Ottawa, for example. So getting them on board early and hearing if they have any concerns about your building now would be good. But ultimately your goal is to get people excited. That's what you want. You want them on board. Okay, so now at this point, all of your work is complete. You have a team, you've got a needs assessment, you've refined your vision, you've got an architectural program, you've got a really clear structure, you know who's doing what. Hopefully you have a site, but at least you've identified one, got some drawings for it, you know roughly how much your project's going to cost, and you've built some supportive partnerships. Now you're going to package that all into a feasibility assessment or business case, and you're going to use that to apply for funding. At this point with the funding, we call it like pre-construction or pre-development. And that's, so somebody asked the really good question, like, is seed funding open? That would be when you're wanting to apply for this. So the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation has that seed funding. We're not clear if it's open or not. Ideally, it opens again soon. But another one that you could be seeking out is, it's called FCM, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And they've got two programs. One is called planning. That would be most similar to seed. And the other one is studies. So those are really good ones to look into. You might even want to do planning during some of this feasibility assessment and then apply for studies once you have your package at the end. But also look into your provincial government. They might have something set up. Your local or municipal government. Some of them do have kind of pre-construction funding for you. And then you can apply to foundations, apply to the local corporations, anywhere you can get a bit of money, because we've already identified that you're possibly paying for a project manager as well as an architect. So that costs money, and there's only going to be more once you move into phase 2 in the design development. So set yourself up for success now. Okay, so let's wrap all of that up, and then we'll pause for questions. So if you don't remember anything else or you ever want to go back, highly recommend you go back to this slide. So know that the process could take many years. That's perfectly okay. You're not alone. That's normal. That is unfortunately the name of development. It's a really complex project that takes a lot of time. We really recommend that you identify a single person to champion and lead and advocate for your project. That's on your staff. Allocating the staff time to this is important too. possibly hiring a project manager. They're going to facilitate the phase, leverage their expertise and experience, and let the ED continue to focus on their primary role. And you might want to hire some others, possibly an architect, possibly a planner. And you have to make sure that your project is financially viable before you're going to move on to the next phase. That's the reason for the first bullet of why it could take many years, is because it has to be viable. And then finally, the work that's conducted in this phase can be compiled really nicely into a business case, and you can use that to apply for pre-construction funding. Pause there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kyla and Megan. This is so much helpful information for folks. So Kyla, we'll give you a sec to have some water there. Um, There are a few questions coming in. I just, before I get into those, want to remind folks, if you can use the Q&A box, that's perfect. It just makes it a bit easier to keep track, although I have been noting the ones coming in the chat. And then another note, once we're done this Q&A section, keep an eye on the chat. I am going to repost the presentation slides because we had a question about whether you'll have access to those. So they'll be in the chat. We will also share them by email afterwards. So, no worries if your question's in the chat. So the first question is a follow-up actually from the previous Q&A round. And so it was related to the seed applications. Is someone wondering, is it possible to know how much they got? You said there were a couple you did that were successful, or perhaps a ballpark of what's realistic for those.
Yeah, great question. I was actually pleasantly surprised by the amount of money that we received for these ones. So 2 of the applications each got $80,000. Their buildings kind of ranged in size. They were thinking about 20 units, and the other one was thinking about 40. And then another one was just looking at doing like a safe home. And so it was 1 unit, but could accommodate a large family. So they had 5 beds, a larger unit, and they got $20,000. In my experience with seed prior to that, it was smaller amounts of money. I think it was in 2021. I worked on a project that had 49 units, and they got about, well, now I think it was around $50,000. It was definitely less than 80. So I know that it helps that like vulnerable populations. I think that gets a lot more points in their system. So that could be the difference, where my old project was a mixed affordable housing. So that might have been part of it.
Awesome. And then we have a question about, so do we need to have access to police when opening in a rural municipality, or could you open a shelter that's further away from police in that region?
Hmm. I don't have a clear answer for that one. It's a good question. I don't know of a requirement. Um, we could maybe follow up if that person wants to leave their contact info, and we could look into that and maybe might be talking to shelters that operate in a more kind of remote setting and how they've set that up.
Awesome. Thanks. I have a note of the person who asked, so I can connect you all by email afterwards. And as well, if there are folks here from rural areas who have a thought on that from their own experience, feel free to pop that in the chat. And similarly, there are some folks sharing their own experience with seed funding and saying they got person is saying 10,000, another saying 14,000. So those are some other examples there.
Mm. And those smaller ones, I would expect, well, I could be wrong. I don't know if they just got them in this like recent, like March 2024 announcement, but when seed was kind of wrapping up in 2022, before they paused for a year and a half, people were getting really small amounts. So I don't know if that could play into it.
Awesome, thanks. So we have a couple more questions here, and then we'll move on to Amanda. So one question is, you mentioned sort of the BC model where, a government body kind of owns the building. So could you say anything about the pros and cons of that model? The person who asked is sharing, they struggle with like control of information to the rest of the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll share briefly, and then honestly, like Amanda might have even more to say, like from the BC context, but just in general to say like owning versus having somebody else own your building. In one sense, it's a plus because that's like your asset, right? You can leverage that later, and maybe even the land is quite large and you can build more on it later, but it's something that you then own. Like, you can kind of think of this like more personally too, right? Like, is it better for me to own my own home or to rent it? The downside of owning your own home is when you need to replace your roof or it floods and all of these things that suddenly is on your dime, right? Where if you're just renting it from, like, if you're just the operator and the roof needs replaced, great. The whoever is the owner of it needs to take care of those like capital repairs that are needed, or if the HVAC system suddenly goes, right? It's nice when you're a renter and you can just call your landlord to come in and fix things. I would say that, again, like, maybe this is a really good example, I guess, to use it this way. If you have a good landlord, that works well, right? So if you have a good relationship with the owner of the building, I can see the benefit there compared to, I think a few are operating, and I don't want to like call out, I can't think of like a specific example, but I feel like I heard from a few shelters maybe in Manitoba that were struggling with this a bit, where it's the provincial government that owns the building, but they kind of weren't taking care of a few of the things that they needed them to take care of. So you do end up kind of pigeonholed that way. So I'd say you have a lot more autonomy when you own your own building. You can do more with it, but then you're on the hook when there are major issues, and you have to be able to purchase it at the start. So it's nice if it's gifted to you, but if you're trying to purchase it, it's obviously that expense too.
Great. So I'm going to ask two questions at once here, and then if you can give a quick answer to those, and then we'll move on to Amanda. And I'm going to keep noting questions for once Amanda has spoken, because we'll do more Q&A at the end. So two quick questions here. So one is, what is the maximum amount that can be applied for under this funding, which I think is referring to the seed funding? And then a question, are we restricted to specific catchment areas? And I'm not sure if that's general or related to seed funding applications, but
Mm, I, to be honest, I'm not quite clear with the catchment one. Maybe if they want to just add a bit more detail, and we can always follow up with that at the end. For the CMHC seed funding, I think it was $150,000 was the maximum that you could ask for. But like, I was happy with the 80, to be honest. That was really good. So I think it's quite difficult to get to that maximum. I'll put the plug. Oh, Megan.
I just want to add, it's $150, I believe, of contribution or grant only funding. You also could be offered a loan of up to
Yes.
350,000 under the seed program if you needed more money that way, but the maximum for grants is 150.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a really good note. They do have that smaller loan available to you. For the two that we mentioned for FCM, the planning one, you can get up to 30,000, and the studies one, 200,000. There is like a bit of a restriction where it's 30,000, but they cover 80% of your project. So you'd need to like have a bit more than 30,000 to get 30,000. And for the studies with the 200,000, it covers 50%. So you'd have to say like, oh, we're spending 400, we're covering 200, you're going to pay for the other 200. Hopefully that isn't too complicated. We can throw in maybe the links to FCM as well here.
great, thank you. So I know that there are a few more questions here. I'm going to hold those and let Amanda take over, and then we will come back to questions at the end. I just want to make sure we give Amanda enough time. So Amanda, over to you.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Amanda Owens. I am the Executive Director at Ksan Society, located on the traditional Tsimshian territory of the Kitsilis and Kitsim people. These lands are located in northwestern BC, otherwise known as Terrace. I've been with Ksan Society since 2007 and the Executive Director since 2014. We are an umbrella organization operating multiple anti-violence programs, social housing programs, and food security programs. A bit of our history on development. We completed both an affordable housing project and involved in a completion of a supportive housing project in 2019. We're a month away or so from the completion of our second stage housing project, and we are in the design phase of a mixed use project. The mixed use project is 30% affordable market rents, 50% rent geared income, and 20% deep subsidy or shelter rate. And for those in BC that are familiar with the BC Housing funding, it's under the Community Housing Fund, CHF. When we began and pursuing a project development, the first one was our affordable housing project. And that was back in 2014 when I first came on as executive director. And the process definitely seemed very overwhelming. I didn't know where to start or who to connect with first. Luckily, I met with a development consultant that actually came to visit me, and they explained the process to me. But one of my concerns was how to cover the cost of a development consultant, because we were a small organization at that time and we didn't have a budget to pay any of those fees. And the way it worked out was the development consultant put the project together for us, the feasibility, the preliminary design with the architect, and submitted a proposal to BC Housing for the pre-development funding. And when we were approved for the pre-development funding, then the development consultant and the architect were able to recoup their fees for their the initial phase of the project. For that part, I think our fees were roughly, for the development consultant, $15,000, and the architect was about $5,000. And how our projects have worked out too, and talking about engaging and who to engage with first. So our affordable housing project, we were leased the land from the municipality. So the city was our first engagement in getting our project off the ground. Once we had that land secured, then secured our development consultant, and then brought on our architect, and that those pieces came together to come up with our feasibility and put forward our proposal to BC Housing. Our second stage housing project was completely different because we owned 2 of the parcels of land. It was a collaboration of 3 parcels of land, 2 owned by Ksan and 1 owned by another organization. So my first engagement was actually with BC Housing and their development team. One of their staff was in Terrace, and I was meeting with them, and I showed them the piece of property, and I said that I wanted to do a project. It was right beside our current transition house, and the proximity to services already under our umbrella was ideal for a second stage housing project. And because she was on board and she thought it was a great idea, that's when I was able to engage again with the same development consultant that we used for affordable housing project. And we did have a new architect that we worked with on this project, but was very familiar with working with BC Housing, and they were able to put together another proposal and submit to BC Housing for pre-development funding. So we are almost at completion of that project, which is really exciting. Our CHF, or Community Housing Fund, the mixed use project, again, was a different engagement process, as our municipality doesn't have available lands for lease, as in our affordable housing project. So when I was speaking with the development team at BC Housing about how to secure land and get another project off the ground, the suggestion was to find a development team in Terrace that had lands available. And so I engaged with a development construction organization that had land, and I partnered with them, and they secured the land and held it for the project while we did the preliminary design phase, and that helped get it off the ground. So different modes of entry into different types of projects, but it definitely helps with building relationships amongst in your community. So definitely lots of communications with the municipality and the planning department. You need to make sure that they are on board with your project and that they see it as a good fit for the neighborhood and the type of project that you want to do. Because we have attempted other projects where the city says, no, that's not a good use of the land, and we don't see that as being a good fit for the neighborhood. So that does happen. Also, when you have projects that have multiple partnerships, it does definitely have a longer feasibility timeline. We've had a lot of, not setbacks, but just a longer wait time just to get our projects off the ground when you have multiple agencies involved. Yeah, so I think that that was it for our experience so far in development, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone might have.
Amazing. Thank you, Amanda. It's so great to have that perspective from all of your different experiences.
Mhm.
So we do have about 10 minutes left. We can open up to questions. This can be questions for Amanda, for Kyla, for Megan. So for anything we've covered so far. So while folks are putting those into the Q&A box, I'm going to circle back to a few questions that we had left over from before. And so I think this was again related to just that kind of owner versus kind of renting model. So for folks where they are renting, or let's say it's the ministry who owns the building or the land, um, who would cover like an expansion or a renovation in that type of situation?
Yeah, that could get really complicated. Honestly, it depends. It would have to be a discussion. If you're the one that's wanting it, it's likely more on your dollar. That said, you might have a better chance when you're applying for the funding. Some funding, like we covered like that pre-development funding. In the next webinar, we'll talk more about like that multi-million dollar, like some of those programs. It's still usually CMHC or your provincial, like a BC housing, for example. Not all provinces have a BC housing, and I would say that they're one of the ones that's like the best provincial funder as far as provincial funders go. But if you're applying for, let's say, CMHC, it might actually look better with the application coming from you than that, like whoever is the other owner. But you probably have to have some sort of like rental agreement in place. I don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say CMHC has like a minimum of 20 years, but like you should really have more like a 50-year plus agreement. A lot of them tend to be like a 99-year lease agreement or whatever. That's going to give you the best chance. Again, these fundings programs, because they're kind of fewer and further between, they are competitive. So you want to look the best. So it's more about that. Hopefully that answers the question. Okay, I don't know if Amanda or Megan want to jump in.
If I can, we do 60-year leases on properties that are not owned by our organization.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, when you build, who owns the place? And I know that's up in the air, but I think the reason for asking is if the shelter were to close for any reason, where would the money from the sale go?
It would depend on who owns it, and it would depend on like how that closure works. If you have a mortgage, which again, we'll talk a bit more in depth on like if you're taking out a loan or doing kind of like financing in the next webinar. It's unlikely that many of the people who are on this webinar are doing a mortgage because your operating budget is going to be quite slim. So if you're suddenly paying hundreds of thousands of dollars each year to pay off a multi-million dollar mortgage, that might not be in the books for you. But let's say you've got that set up. CMHC, they always want to be the like first one listed on the title. So they would take it over. If your municipality gave you the land, they've probably got it written into their funding agreement that maybe they would take it over second. We know of a project right now where, yeah, CMHC is on it first, and then the province of Alberta is on there second. So essentially it will go back to the funder likely. If somebody has given you a lot of money and to build, and then for some reason you had to close, it's probably written into the funding agreement who would end up taking that building over. If you if you did it all yourself, then I think you would get to keep the money yourself, but I don't know how common that would be.
Great, thank you. So another question here, how do you find a development consultant and/or project manager?
Yeah, beyond like a Google search, I would say email Megan and I. We could cut down that time for you significantly. Another, like honestly though, a good example, if there's somebody in your area who has built recently, ideally it's somebody in our sector, but maybe that's not the case. But even if it's just like affordable housing or you saw something go up, like send them an email and figure out if they had a good experience. That would be my number one, is figuring out if they had a good experience, because in some cases they might not have. Maybe they had a for-profit, or some of these non-for-profit ones, their capacity changes or staff turnover. So figure out if they had a good experience, and that would be a good way too. Amanda has something.
Amanda, go ahead. Yeah.
Yes, for us, our funder has a list of development consultants that we can, that they've provided that we can go through. So reach out to your funder as well.
Awesome. And this next question is for you again, Amanda, actually. So someone wondering, how much of your time as ED did you carve out for the development project or projects, I guess?
In the beginning, during the preliminary design phase, we meet monthly, once a month, for about an hour. And just so in the beginning, the architect is doing a lot of the work on the design and checks in once a month just to make sure that the idea that he's coming up with matches what it is that you want to come to fruition. And then as the project goes along, we meet bi-weekly for about an hour during the design phase. And then at the end, when you're wrapping up construction, we actually meet weekly for about an hour. And then sometimes there's additional meetings on top of that when they start commissioning and whatnot.
Great, thank you. And then can you clarify, and I'm not sure who used this term, so I will let anyone answer, but the term mixed use. So is that sort of rental offices and housing, or could it be different types of services under one roof? So like a safe home and second stage in one place?
I use that term for my CHF project, or Community Housing Fund project. It's a mixture that BC Housing came up specific for that funding call, and it was 30% affordable, 50% rent geared income, and 20% shelter rate.
Maybe just to add, like sometimes they call that also like mixed income housing, would be like the different amounts of rent that people pay, and that they're not all doing the exact same. Planners and people at the city might say mixed use as like the use of the building. So it's not just residential, it also has commercial, for example. And then sometimes they'll also be like mixed tenure. And so tenure, thinking like maybe if you've got people who are transitional housing, so they'll live there for maybe 1 or 2 years, and you have permanent housing, would be like different tenant types, right? Like they'd be on different kind of, like a rental agreement or whatever you've set up for your program.
Great. And a follow-up to that, is mixed the most viable?
Depends. Depends on the the funding program probably that you're applying to. It might not be allowed actually. With some of the funding programs you're applying to, they might say it's got to be like the base level of affordability and you can't actually mix your incomes. If you're doing a project, I'd say that's more like long-term housing, then yes, it would bring in more rent income, and therefore you could afford a mortgage maybe, and be able to your project that way. But then if it hurts you where you can't get the grants anymore, that's where I would say like that complex Excel pro forma is when you would like, I've worked on projects where you have like 3 different ones and they're all for different types, and you're figuring out, what your chances are, and maybe because you weren't successful with one funding, then you go to the other. It's a really good question that probably doesn't have a clear answer, and it would depend a bit on context. I know that's kind of like a not as fun of an answer to give, but it does depend, I'd say, mostly on the funding. Yep.
Great. Oh, I was going to say there's no more questions, but in fact, one just came in, or just a response there. So the person saying they're thinking seniors, some professional higher end, and then some second stage. So that's the example.
Maybe just to add to that then too, like if that person who is thinking about like kind of those different people and maybe they've got different rental incomes and stuff, like your performance will be more complex, but I would again like highly recommend then working with a project manager who has experience in a few of those and are kind of able to bring that all together to figure out what your incomes are. And maybe then you're also thinking like the physical design of the building is quite different for those different people, and having different secure entrances for just the second stage that really is quite separate from the other parts of the building, and thinking through like what are the safety and security measures needed for that, like different fob or like key fob systems, all of that kind of thing. So yeah, it's totally viable. I get it too, probably when you're thinking, when we talked about that housing needs assessment where you're like, we need to house all of these people. It's ambitious probably to do it in a one project, but not impossible. It's just thinking through pieces a little bit longer.
Amazing. Thank you. So I'm going to start wrapping us up here. We're almost at the end, and that does look like we've gotten to most of the questions. So I've put in the chat a couple of links. So there's the second stage project website, our website that Kyla and Megan mentioned. So if you did want to reach out to Kyla and Megan, see any of those resources that they've mentioned, you can go there. We will also send all of this by email within a few days. I've also shared the link to our webinar page. As we keep mentioning, there are 2 more webinars on this topic. And so if you want to know what comes next, you have other questions, please feel free to sign up there. And I'm also just putting in, oh, there we go. And Megan has that up on the screen now, the dates for all of those. So that's perfect. Thank you, Megan. I'm also putting into the chat a feedback form, which you will also see when you close Zoom. It will take you to this feedback form. If you have a few minutes to fill that out, it's really helpful for us, especially because there are 2 more webinars coming. We'd love to just get your thoughts on how this one went. And so with that, I just want to say thank you, a huge thank you to Kyla, Megan, and Amanda for this wonderful informative presentation, and to Miriam and to Danielle for interpreting so that everyone could participate. And of course, to all of you who are participating and asked really, really great questions. So thank you so much to everyone. And we'll see you for part 2.